The gala hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, a sea of velvet gowns and tailored tuxedos moving in synchronized elegance. Among the crowd, Jonathan Carrington stood tall, his jaw tight, eyes scanning for admiration. Always admiration. That night, he had spared no expense on the gown he bought for his wife, Victoria. It was a masterpiece of silk and sequins, designed by the most exclusive Parisian atelier. To Jonathan, it was more than a gift. It was a statement. And yet, as he watched her hesitate before him, he felt impatience prick at his pride. "Victoria, wear it now," he commanded sharply, his voice slicing to the polite hum of conversation. A few heads turned, curiosity sparking in the air. Victoria's fingers trembled as she clutched the exquisite fabric, her cheeks flushing a storm of embarrassment and hurt. I don't want to," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Do it. Everyone is waiting. Don't make me embarrass you more than this needs to be." A hush fell over the nearby guests, the tension thick enough to taste. Victoria, usually composed and elegant, froze. The room seemed to shrink around them. She looked at him, not with the adoration he craved, but with something far heavier, dread and disbelief. For a fleeting moment, Jonathan felt a flicker of triumph, the satisfaction of bending her to his will. But the instant she obeyed, the murmurs of the crowd didn't rise in admiration. They rippled in horror and disgust. Eyes that once reflected envy now stared with judgment. The photographers, who had been ready for a glamorous pose, snapped incessantly, capturing every moment. Jonathan, who had imagined pride swelling in his chest, suddenly felt the heat of all those eyes burn into him like fire. Victoria's face, pale and unflinching, met his gaze. And in that moment, Jonathan saw it. The respect he thought he commanded in that room wasn't there. What shimmered in the crowd's eyes was not admiration, but shock. And as whispers grew into hushed conversations, a sinking realization clawed at him. The power he had tried to assert had backfired spectacularly. The gown, once a symbol of his gift, now felt like a noose. Victoria stood tall, composed despite the humiliation, her dignity radiating like a shield that even his wealth and influence couldn't penetrate. Jonathan's heart thudded in his chest, not with triumph, but with the first pangs of regret, sharp and suffocating. He had underestimated her, underestimated the weight of public scrutiny, and worst of all, he had underestimated himself. The night went on, but for Jonathan, it was a descent into a private torment. Each whispered comment, each averted glance, felt like a verdict. And as he watched Victoria walk away gracefully, ignoring his calls, ignoring his presence, he realized the truth he had refused to see. Some gestures, however lavish, cannot force respect, cannot buy admiration, and cannot undo the damage done in a single thoughtless moment. Jonathan followed her with hurried steps, but Victoria's composure remained unshaken. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, graceful yet distant, and the whispers that had circled around them seemed to part for her, as if instinctively respecting her space. Jonathan's chest burned, not with the thrill of conquest he had expected, but with gnawing, hollow panic. Every eye he imagined boring into him from the crowd made him shrink, a feeling foreign to a man who had always been in control. "Victoria," he called again, louder this time, his voice cracking just enough to betray his frustration. She stopped mid-step, not turning to him, but the slight tilt of her head was enough for him to see that she had heard. "Jonathan," she said finally, her voice calm but firm, slicing through his mounting panic. "This ends tonight. I will not be humiliated because of your ego." Her words hit him like ice water. Ego. That single word carried more weight than the applause he had imagined, more than the thousands he had spent on a gown. It was a mirror he could not look away from, reflecting not power, but arrogance. And as he looked at her now, he saw the full measure of his mistake. The room had been a stage, and in his blind ambition, he had forgotten that the most important audience was the one standing right in front of him. He opened his mouth, searching for an excuse, for a justification that might somehow mask the depths of his failure. But the words refused to come. All he could feel was the oppressive awareness of how the night had unraveled so quickly. Victoria turned, stepping down the grand staircase, leaving a trail of silk behind her like a banner of defiance. Jonathan followed, desperately, hoping that he could catch her before she reached the edge of the hall, before the humiliation cemented itself as a story that would be whispered about for months. "Victoria, please," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't mean for it to." "To what?" she interrupted, stopping abruptly and turning to face him. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, and even in the dim glow of the chandeliers, they seemed to blaze with quiet fury. "To humiliate me in front of our friends, our colleagues, everyone you claim to respect?" Jonathan's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, tasting the bitter reality of the situation. Every carefully crafted image of himself as a powerful, respected man had crumbled in the span of a few minutes. He had thought the gown would impress her, would cement his status in her eyes, but instead it had exposed a vulnerability he wasn't prepared to confront. The fragility of his relationships when they were built on control rather than understanding. I thought it would make you happy," he confessed, each word heavy with shame. "I thought it would show everyone how much I care." Victoria shook her head, the disappointment radiating from her in waves. "Caring doesn't mean forcing someone to do what you want. It doesn't mean humiliating them to prove your love." Her voice softened just slightly, enough to cut deeper than any anger could. "You didn't give me a choice, Jonathan. That's the difference." Jonathan felt the sting of her words more acutely than any public embarrassment. He had always believed that money and influence could command respect, could shape perceptions, but respect and love, real love, required something far more elusive: empathy, patience, understanding. And in that moment, he realized he had none of it. He tried to take her hand, but she stepped back, holding her space. "I'm not done with tonight," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But I am done with you treating me as though I exist only for your image, for your approval. You need to understand that, Jonathan. Truly understand." The weight of her words pressed down on him, suffocating, forcing him to confront the truth he had long avoided. His life had been a series of carefully orchestrated moves, designed to maintain control, to impress, to dominate. Yet here, in the quiet intensity of her gaze, he realized how hollow it had all been. All the wealth, the gala appearances, the accolades. None of it mattered if the person he loved most could not stand beside him freely, without fear, without coercion. The hall behind them continued its revelry, but Jonathan no longer heard it. He only felt the cold, undeniable truth settling over him like a shroud. He had to change, not for the applause of a crowd, not for the admiration of colleagues, but for Victoria. And yet, change felt impossibly difficult, as if he were trying to rewrite a life built brick by brick on habits he had mistaken for strength. Victoria turned away again, moving toward the exit, her pace steady, unyielding. Jonathan's heart ached with the fear of losing her, not in the abstract sense, not as some dramatic tableau, but truly, irrevocably. He had always taken for granted the loyalty and patience she had shown him, assuming her love would bend to his will. Now, confronted with the consequences of his arrogance, he understood that love was never so easily conquered. He ran after her, finally catching up outside in the cool night air. The city lights shimmered like a constellation fallen to earth, but there was no beauty for him in the glittering scene, only the sharp sting of regret and the urgent need to make amends. "Victoria," he said again, his voice trembling. "Please, I was wrong. She stopped and faced him, her hands resting on her hips, the epitome of controlled fury. "You need to understand that saying, 'I'm sorry' isn't enough this time," she said. "Actions matter more than words, Jonathan. You've humiliated me in front of everyone, and that cannot simply be undone with apologies." The weight of her words struck him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth, but no defense could possibly excuse what he had done. All he could do was nod, a silent acknowledgement of his failure, the first step toward any hope of redemption. Victoria looked at him one last time, and for a moment he saw something flicker in her eyes, something softer, cautious, but not trust. It was a warning and a chance all at once. "You have a lot to prove," she said, turning away. "But tonight, you start by understanding the cost of your arrogance." Jonathan watched her disappear into the shadows, feeling the emptiness of the gala, the empty praise, and the shallow applause he had once sought with such fervor. He realized that nothing in his world, no wealth, no prestige, no power, could restore what he had jeopardized in moments of pride. Only time, humility, and relentless effort could. The night stretched before him, quiet now except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional echo of footsteps. Jonathan stood alone, the cool air biting at his face, forcing clarity where there had been only ego. He understood now that love could not be commanded, that respect could not be purchased, and that true intimacy required patience and vulnerability, qualities he had long neglected. And as he turned to leave, he made a silent promise to himself that he would do everything in his power to earn back what he had lost, to rebuild the trust he had shattered, and to finally understand the meaning of partnership beyond control, beyond appearances. But he knew, painfully, that the road would be long, and that every misstep along the way would be a reminder of the night he had forced his wife into humiliation, and regretted it more than he had ever imagined possible. Days passed like an eternity for Jonathan, each moment a sharp reminder of his arrogance and the gulf he had created between himself and Victoria. He returned to the empty echo of their home, the grand halls now feeling smaller, suffocating, haunted by the memory of that night. For the first time in his life, the weight of silence was unbearable, not because he feared solitude, but because it reflected the emptiness of his own choices. He realized that wealth, influence, and appearances meant nothing without trust, respect, and love. And he understood that if he truly wanted Victoria back, he would have to start by confronting not the world, but himself. Jonathan began in small ways. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions without expecting answers. He learned the art of patience, discovering that gestures, no matter how grand, could never replace genuine understanding. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, painstakingly, Victoria noticed the changes. It was not an immediate reconciliation. Her trust had been fractured, and rightfully so, but the cracks she had once perceived in his character were now being filled with humility, sincerity, and a deep, unwavering commitment to earn back what he had jeopardized. The gala, which had once been the pinnacle of his pride, became the benchmark of his transformation. Jonathan avoided public displays and grandiose gestures, focusing instead on quiet acts of thoughtfulness. He supported Victoria's passions, celebrated her achievements without seeking credit, and let her voice, her choices, her independence shine without interference. Each time he resisted the urge to dominate, each time he put her comfort above his ego, he felt a small victory, a step closer to redemption. One evening, weeks after that fateful night, Victoria invited him to a private dinner. Not at a gala, not in the eyes of the world, but in the quiet intimacy of their own home. She had prepared the table herself, soft candlelight flickering against crystal glasses, her gown elegant but understated. Jonathan felt a nervous thrill, the kind he had never experienced among crowds, among accolades, or among applause. This was vulnerability, real, raw, and infinitely more meaningful than the empty adoration of strangers. "Jonathan," she said softly, seating him, her eyes holding his with that same intensity he had once feared. "I've been watching. I've seen your efforts. And while what happened at the gala can't be erased, I can see that you've begun to understand, that you are truly trying." He swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Victoria, I've been a fool," he admitted, his voice low but unwavering. "I let pride, ego, and the need to impress blind me. I hurt you publicly, privately. I've endangered the very thing I care about most. And I vow to spend the rest of my life making this right. Not with gifts, not with spectacle, but with love, respect, and the patience I should have had from the beginning." A faint smile touched Victoria's lips, one that carried the promise of cautious hope. "Actions speak louder than words, Jonathan, and you've proven you are capable of change. But know this, if you ever return to the man who sought control over love, there will be no second chance." Jonathan nodded, the gravity of her words sinking into him like roots taking hold in fertile soil. He knew this was not a reward. It was a test, a threshold he had to honor and uphold every single day. And he did. From that night on, he lived with a renewed understanding of partnership, a deeper awareness of respect, and a quiet reverence of the person he had once taken for granted. Over time, the walls that Victoria had carefully built around her heart began to soften. She laughed more freely in his presence, shared her thoughts without hesitation, and allowed the moments of tenderness to return. Each shared smile, each unspoken understanding, became a testament to their hard-won reconciliation. The world outside, with its glittering galas and shallow praise, no longer mattered. They had discovered a life of authenticity, one that could survive storms of arrogance, whispers of judgment, and even the weight of human mistakes. Jonathan never forgot that night, nor the lesson it etched permanently into his soul. He learned that love is not a trophy to be displayed, nor a performance for the world to admire. It is quiet, relentless, patient. It is earned in the small moments, in the choices that honor the other person's dignity, in the courage to put aside ego and pride for the sake of connection. And with Victoria by his side, he understood something far more magnificent than he'd ever imagined. The greatest victories are not the ones celebrated with applause, but the ones achieved in the sanctity of respect, trust, and unwavering love. Years later, when the memory of the gala lingered like a distant storm, Jonathan and Victoria would sometimes laugh softly about it, not in shame, but in reverence for how far they had come. That night had been a crucible, one that exposed flaws, forced introspection, and ultimately forged a bond stronger than any superficial display of wealth or status could ever create. They had survived humiliation, tested patience, and confronted pride. And in doing so, they had built a partnership that was unbreakable, a love that was no longer performative, but real, radiant, and enduring. And so, in the end, Jonathan understood the true cost of his arrogance, the depth of his mistakes, and the boundless value of redemption. He had forced a moment of public shame, but from that mistake grew humility. He had threatened the love of his life, yet it was through this trial that he learned to truly cherish her. The gala, once a symbol of his hubris, became a story of transformation, a story of a man who discovered that the most magnificent victories are those that win a heart rather than the admiration of a crowd. Victoria and Jonathan moved forward, not unscathed, but wiser, stronger, and more intimately connected than ever before. Their journey was not defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the choices made afterward. The choices that honored love, respect, and partnership above pride, power, and vanity. And as they walked together, hand in hand, into a future shaped by understanding and grace, it became clear that some lessons, no matter how painful, are the very ones that make life and love truly extraordinary.